For more on the situation in Egypt and beyond, let's turn to our roundtable to discuss the latest developments. Reva Bhalla is Director of Geopolitical Analysis at Stratfor, a private global intelligence company. She's also a senior analyst for the Middle East, South Asia, and Latin American regions. And Aaron David Miller is a public policy scholar at Washington's Woodrow Wilson Center. He's also the author of The Much Too Promised Land and has served as an advisor for Arab-Israeli negotiations at the State Department. Thank you both for joining us on Bottom Line. It's a pleasure to have you on. Ms. Bhalla, if I might begin with you, as our Callie Carlin was just telling us in a news update that it seems that the White House now is pushing for a quicker transfer of power in Egypt. Is that something the administration should be doing at this time?
Well, Stratfor doesn't really take a policy line, but you can certainly understand why there's so much urgency behind the U.S. position. And again, we have to really look at the military because everybody, particularly the United States and Israel, are looking to the military to manage this transition in an orderly manner. The military thus far is giving Mubarak time, but the longer they wait and the more the demonstrations intensify, I think there's a greater risk that the military may not be able to handle the situation, and that's where the United States is growing concerned. So they'd rather see this transition occur sooner rather than later.
Mr. Miller, Ms. Bhalla was talking about the military trying to handle this situation. Before you two came on, I interviewed one of our reporters via phone from Cairo, and she was set upon and her life was threatened. Is that how the military is handling this situation in Cairo and in Egypt?
You know, in any combustible situation, you're likely to have all kinds of possibilities for excess. I mean, the reality is today the military is clearly shielded, made a judgment to shield those anti-Mubarak demonstrators from the government agents who over the last several days have inflicted a good deal of pain, harm, death on some of the demonstrators. The military is critical, and the reality is whatever Barack Obama wants or doesn't want, the issue is whether or not the military ultimately, either through an incentive to the president, by finding a political solution which allows him to step down but not step out of Egypt, or alternatively, the military just says to the boss, look, you're jeopardizing the stability of the country, the integrity of the armed forces, it's time. And we haven't reached that point yet, apparently.
Ms. Bhalla, let's talk about geopolitics. Given the volatile, oftentimes volatile situation in the Middle East, what does this do to the peace process between the Israelis and the Palestinians? The quartet, that group that's supposed to be helping to push that peace process along, is scheduled to meet, I believe it's next week.
Well, over the past couple of days, the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood has been releasing statements in which they've been basically saying that the peace accord between Egypt and Israel would be coming into question. And specifically, they've been calling for a referendum on the peace accord. And you can certainly see why Israel and the United States would be extremely concerned about that. And that really gets to the heart of Israeli national security. Israel depends on its ability to keep its Arab neighbors sufficiently weak and divided. And if you look at kind of the regional framework right now, Jordan, a pretty marginal player, you have Lebanon in a self-contained chaos. You know, Syria remains a threat, but not a really serious one. They're more interested in dominating Lebanon and making money there. That really leaves Egypt as the critical player. And if Egypt were to shift to a military posture, which I don't think is a near-term threat, that is the greater concern right now.
Ms. Bhalla, I'm struck by something that you just said, to leave its Arab neighbors weak and divided. Why that sentiment?
Well, look at the history. Israel knows that it's going to be in a very untenable situation if its Arab neighbors were able to unite and pose a united military threat against Israel. That is a direct threat to Israel's existence. And so that's something that they've constantly been trying to overcome. The peace accords are integral to that. Jordan and Egypt specifically, and they've had their own ways of dealing with the Syrians over the years. So again, Egypt is the pivot of the Arab world. I think we might see maybe some rhetorical shifts in Egypt's foreign policy. Even as the military tries to manage this transition, they may do so for domestic political purposes. But in terms of operationalizing a real shift in foreign policy, I think there are real arresters to that, especially when you take the army into account.
Mr. Miller, freedom in Egypt, do you believe that would in fact lead to intense anti-Israeli sentiment?
I think the space, both for the United States and for Israel, regardless of who emerges in the post-Mubarak era, is going to narrow considerably. I mean, it's just common sense, and there's a logic chain. If, in fact, the Egyptian political system is going to be more responsive, more transparent, more open, it's going to have to reflect all kinds of sensitivities and strains, Islamic sentiments as well as secular nationalism, and by definition, you're going to find yourself in a situation in which American policies, containment of Iran, Egypt's pursuit of a nuclear weapon, closer relationships with Syria, different postures on Gaza, all of these things are going to impose themselves in a way that we haven't seen in the course of the last 30 years. That doesn't mean the treaty will be renounced. It doesn't mean the Egyptians are going to give back the $1+ billion, not giving back the check for that. But the political space that American policymakers have come to enjoy and the sort of acquiescence in Israeli behavior and actions, even while the Egyptians didn't like it, that's going to be increasingly perilous in the months and probably in the years to come.
Ms. Bhalla, let's talk about likely successors to Hosni Mubarak, the vice president, his newly named vice president, Omar Suleiman. Is he more in the mold of Mr. Mubarak, or does he bring something different to the table?
Well, if you look at the main players right now, Omar Suleiman has stood by Mubarak for a long time. He's also someone that's pretty well respected within the security establishment. He's also at a pretty advanced age, though, and I think that's something that the military establishment is a bit concerned about. They want somebody, one of their own, with staying power. So in looking at who else might be there, we have Ahmed Shafiq, who's the former Air Force commander, Air Force chief, and he's been appointed prime minister, and he's been touted for a while now as a potential successor because he benefits from having this dual civilian and military role. Previously, he was a minister for civil aviation. So he's somebody to watch closely. I think also military figures in Egypt, like Marshal Tantawi, the current defense minister, is looking at the Algerian model, where you have a sort of council of military members managing things behind the scenes and perhaps a civilian figurehead up front to give this more of a democratic face to the government. And that's why it's important to look at figures, for example, Ammar Moussa, the former Arab League chief as well.
Mr. Miller, in our last minute, I did mention that you've served as an advisor for Arab-Israeli negotiations at the State Department. What's Secretary of State Clinton's role in this right now?
I think it's a difficult role to play. This is clearly an issue that is being orchestrated through the NSC. The president is being briefed probably hourly on this. The two of them are working together. The reality, though, is it's not the secretary or the president. The question is, what can a great power thousands of miles away from a system in turmoil actually do? If we get too close and leave our fingerprints on it, we'll appear to be complicit if the ending is an unhappy one. If we leave it and let nature take its course, we really run the risk of major violence. So the administration is trying desperately not to leave American fingerprints, Frank Wisner's mission notwithstanding, but at the same time guide this, keep open channels to the military as well as to the president to see whether or not they can reinforce and shepherd what must be an Egyptian internally sanctioned solution to this crisis. But make no mistake, the bargain that has been struck between the United States and Egypt is about to come undone, and a new sort of contract is going to have to be renegotiated, and it's going to be an extremely sensitive period.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Aaron David Miller, public policy scholar at Washington's Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, and Reva Bhalla, Director of Geopolitical Analysis at Stratfor. Thank you both so much. We appreciate your time today.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.